Good morning. It is 9:01, Tuesday, January the 9th. I'd like to call this meeting of the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy to order. We'll start with a roll call. My name is Brian Jolly. I'm currently president of the Board of Pharmacy. Dr. Rodney Richmond. Present. Dr. Lynn Krause. Here. Dr. Lenore Newsom. Present. Dr. Debbie Mack. Here. Mr. Harold Simpson. Here. Dr. Beth Davenport. I would like to note for the record that Dr. Clint Boone, who is also a pharmacist member of the Board of Pharmacy, has recused from this hearing. We do have a quorum and we're ready to get started. As a first, I guess, point of business, it's not often that we get to recognize important anniversaries, but we have one that we want to recognize today. And Dr. John Kirtley, as many of you know, has been with the Board of Pharmacy for quite a while. He's celebrating his 20-year anniversary with the state. And so on behalf of the board, Dr. Kirtley, we want to thank you for your years of service to the state of Arkansas. And we have a certificate of recognition here signed by the governor and the Secretary of State. So I'd like to present this to you.
You have to leave now?
Yes, yes, you've done your time. And I think, Dr. Kirtley, you may have had a housekeeping item you wanted to start with before we turn it over to the hearing officer.
I did, just real quickly. First of all, thank you for that. I did have a lot more color in my hair when I started, as Brian and I both did when we were in class together. At the first meeting of the board every year, the board has to adopt and approve expense reimbursement and travel reimbursement for the board and the staff. So we have put that in front of you just as an official action, since this is the official first meeting of the board this year, even though it's a specially called meeting.
So we have, this is the handout that we have.
Yes.
Is there any discussion or any questions that we need to, that anyone has before we make a motion on this? Okay, so we have a motion from Dr. Krause to approve. Have a second from Dr. Richmond. Any further discussion? If not, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to our hearing officer for the hearing that we have at hand today and tomorrow.
Hopefully, Mr. President, just today. Just today.
Yeah.
For the record, my name is Charlie Moulton. Everybody here would not know me except for Dr. Newsom. I used to do hearings for this board quite a bit at one point in time, but it's been a while since I've conducted them. So apologies at the front end if I trip up or mess up or do anything that is outside the four corners of your typical protocol. So as I understand it, we've got 3 orders and notice of hearing. They are going to be consolidated. So we're going to hear everything at the same time. The first one is styled before the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy in the matter of CVS Pharmacy number 10408, Bella Vista, Arkansas, AR 20773. That case number is 2021-007. The second one I have, filed before the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy in the matter of CVS Pharmacy 10019, Texarkana, Arkansas, AR 20686. The case number on that one is 2020-105. And then the third one I have, filed before the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy in the matter of CVS Pharmacy 10430, Sherwood, Arkansas, AR 20768. That case number is 2020-104. I will take judicial notice of both the statutes as well as the rules that are governing this proceeding, specifically Arkansas Code annotated 17-92-101 at sequence and the Arkansas Administrative Procedures Act. Council, would you be so kind as to identify yourselves for the record? Who we got?
Yes, thank you.
All right. And gentlemen, good morning. I don't know if I've ever met you before. You look familiar, but I can't.
I think I may have seen it.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it. Ms. Bales, would you be so kind as to identify yourself for the record, please?
Ashley Bales, General Counsel for the Arkansas Board of Pharmacy.
Let's take care of the housekeeping matters in terms of admitting the exhibits that we've got here.
Mr. Hearing Officer, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. I failed to mention this at the first. This was my job and I didn't mention it. Please turn your microphones on. This is a reminder to us as well as those of you out there. Please turn your microphones on when you're speaking.
And let me, Mr. President, if I could tag on to that, if anybody has their phones on live, please put them on vibrate or silent. All right, so we've got a number of exhibits. It's my understanding that there are no objections to the admission of any of the exhibits. Is this correct?
Yes, that is correct. No
That's right.
objections.
I just go ahead and leave that button on.
I will.
Save
Good
your
idea.
fingers
Yes.
some stress. All right, so I've got for the first one in docket 2021-007, I think I've got 9 exhibits. Is that correct?
Yeah, those are the
All right.
9 exhibits on behalf of the Board of
Yeah.
Pharmacy.
Texarkana is the same thing, 9 exhibits. And Sherwood is 8 exhibits, is that correct?
That's correct. And I moved to enter those into evidence.
Without objection?
No objection.
All right. Without objection, exhibits 1 through 9 in the first docket are omitted. 1 through 9 in the second docket are omitted, and 1 through 8 in the third docket are admitted. Spencer, do you have any of your own exhibits that you would like to have admitted?
Yes, Your Honor, we do. I believe they are in the binder on your right-hand side, or that may be it.
Wow.
This
Yeah,
one?
that's correct.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
And there are, I believe, 61 exhibits. We have shared them with Ms. Files and would move to admit those also, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Vales, do you have any objection to the admission of Mr. Mitchell's exhibits 1 through 61?
No objection. If I could, for the board members on your tablets, they're divided up into folders. Board exhibits for 124 formal, those are my exhibits. Then the CVS exhibits are underneath that. And then there's the law book and a statute on misbranded drugs that we'll refer to. And then there's a PowerPoint. So you can open them up. If you open up my folder, they'll be divided by individual stores. But as the hearing officer has discussed, we're going to talk about all of them in one hearing.
It's my understanding too as well that each of you have 3 witnesses. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go ahead and I don't need to give you a thumbnail sketch of how things work in terms of Ms. Vales has the burden. She's going to call the witnesses. You get to cross-examine when she's done. Once counsel are done with their examination, the board gets to ask questions. I typically allow counsel the ability to ask follow-up questions based on the questions from the board. So you can do cleanup if you so desire. But as we go through this, if you have any questions about how the procedure unfolds, just go ahead and let me know. We'll get on the same page with you. All right, opening statements.
Yes.
Please proceed.
All right, thank you. Board members, I'd asked initially for you to take judicial notice of the applicable Arkansas Pharmacy Board rules and statutes in this matter. With that, I will tell you why we're here today. On July 13th, 2020, board staff has received a complaint regarding the CVS store in Sherwood. The allegation was that CVS misfilled a patient's prescription and prescribed them Ambien instead of her prescribed correct medicine, which would be phentermine. Taking the Ambien caused this patient to go into the ER with what she believed was symptoms of stroke. According to the patient, CVS did not respond after she submitted documentation and asked to be for payment for her hospital bills and things like that. And then she was forced to file a complaint with the board when she did not hear anything from CVS. That was July 2020. Then on August 31st, 2020, a patient of the CVS store in Texarkana filed a complaint with the board. She was prescribed Adderall XR and the pharmacist filled it for Folklin. She took the Adderall and fell into a deep depression and had unsuccessful suicide attempt based on the symptoms from taking the Adderall. CVS, once they discovered the error, filled her prescription for Adderall and didn't charge her for it. Concerned about those errors, Investigator Fain was told as part of her duties to go do an audit for errors for those two pharmacies. In addition, Dr. Fain, during her regular inspections, inspected the Bella Vista CVS store in October 27th of 2020. Dr. Fain observed 51 baskets waiting on a countertop to be filled or verified by the pharmacist. She observed 2 transactions for pseudoephedrine completed without the pharmacist involvement at all in violation of Arkansas law. Staff members present told Dr. Fain that they were concerned about the workload and they did not feel that the staffing was adequate. Dr. Fain did an audit for errors for all 3 of the pharmacists, pulling prescriptions for each store for about roughly a 1-month period. As a result of her audit, she discovered that at the Texarkana store, there was an error rate of 5.5% committed by 4 different pharmacists for a total of 72 errors. At the Sherwood Pharmacy, there was an error rate of 5.5% committed by 2 different pharmacists for a total of 26 errors. Then at the Bella Vista Pharmacy, there was an error rate of 8.2% committed by 4 different pharmacists, totaling errors of 106. Board staff set out to handle this matter through our mediation process and an informal hearing in April of 2021. The committee at that point listened to the evidence submitted by CVS pharmacists and testimony from corporate management. The informal committee found that the pharmacists were responsible as well as CVS Corporation was responsible. They imposed non-disciplinary action for 6 pharmacists that had errors totaling 10 or more. The board imposed a disciplinary fine and investigative costs for CVS Corporate, totaled of $29,400 for Texarkana, $29,400 for the Sherwood store, and $19,400 for the Bella Vista store. The pharmacist agreed with the informal committee's decision, and those cases are not in front of you today. However, CVS Pharmacy Corporate did not agree with the informal committee decision. So today we'll be discussing the allegations against those pharmacies that are contained in the order of notice of hearing, which include negligence in their obligation as a license holder for inadequate staffing. They've understaffed pharmacies and created a workflow that has caused repeated errors, and they were committed by various pharmacists. They've committed fraud and deceit with regard to their patients by dispensing misbranded medications and misfilled prescriptions. CVS will argue that the board's informal committee treated CVS differently than other pharmacies that have appeared before the committee, and would specifically point to those that were heard in April of 2021, namely Walgreens and Anderson's Discount Pharmacy. Anderson's and Walgreens were also audited by Dr. Fain for errors and had error rates, some higher, some lower than the ones for CVS that we'll be talking about today. I submit to you that Walgreens case can be differentiated from these matters in front of you today. That investigation determined a larger error rate was attributable to 1 pharmacist who had been assigned duties, who had then been reassigned duties before they met in front of the board committee. Walgreens, when they came from the informal committee, already had a plan of action to eliminate the issues present in their audit before they appeared before the board, and there was no evidence with the Walgreens case that there was insufficient staffing that caused the error rate in that matter. Anderson's, if you'll remember, is not a chain pharmacy. They did not have the resources that CVS and Walgreens do, but they did appear before the committee, and they had made significant changes before they appeared before you. They changed their SIG codes, changed the way they entered their prescriptions, made sure they were including all the information on the labels, increased staff training, and eliminated so many multitasking issues. Anderson's, again, made these changes before they met in front of the board's committee. The board's committee in this case with CVS that occurred in April 2021 was supported by the evidence presented. And board members do not have to treat every case in front of them the same way. The Board of Pharmacy is a specialized board whose members bring their own education and industry knowledge to inform their decisions. There's nothing in the law or statute that says the board is to treat everyone in front of them the same way. The fact that Walgreens and Anderson's took it upon themselves to make these changes before they came into the board distinguishes them from CVS, who when they appeared for the board did not indicate any changes had been made, except for maybe some, telephone calls or things like that. The board is well aware that you're not bound by the informal committee's recommendation in the matter today. So we will start with the evidence on these matters today. You'll hear from Dr. Fain, who will describe her observations and the results of her audit. You'll hear from Dr. Karina Smith, who worked at CVS in Texarkana for 2 years. She can testify to the metric requirements and staffing issues that in her mind contributed to misbranding of drugs and the errors that had potential to affect harm to patients. You'll also hear from Dr. Kirtley, who will testify as the complaints of the med errors that the board received. We'll discuss tools that the board staff has used to identify errors, as well as the history of the interaction between CVS and the board regarding staffing and other issues. You will find, as the informal committee did, that the inaccuracies and errors related to the workload and issues and the expectations of pharmacists working in CVS affected patient safety, and the corporation is responsible, and we will ask you to hold them responsible.
All right, thank you, Ms. Mills. Mr. Mitchell?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Again, David Mitchell, and along with my colleague, Ryan Smith, we're here on behalf of CVS stores 10-019, 10-430, and 10-408. As you just heard, as the result of 3 accuracy audits, CVS was charged with, or has been charged here today with inadequately staffing its pharmacies, which it is alleged has caused prescription errors. CVS submits these allegations are not well-founded and should be dismissed for several reasons. But before I get into that, I want to make one thing very clear right up front. CVS does not contend that no errors were made. That's not our position. As you will hear, Dr. Fain conducted inspections and she identified errors. That's not in dispute. You also just heard about 2 patient complaints that CVS takes very, very seriously, and we do not dispute the allegations with respect to those. And if you will recall, the board imposed fines on the 2 pharmacists that were involved in those 2 complaints at the prior informal hearing. Those were, however, we submit very, very unfortunate isolated incidents, and 2 incidents over particularly the course of time that has passed now do not reflect or certainly do not provide a basis to conclude big picture that staffing is an issue at CVS or that those errors were caused by inadequate staffing. As you will hear in more detail today, 3 CVS stores were audited during 2020. As we all know, that was the middle of COVID. Those audits found error rates of 5.5% in Texarkana, 5.5% at the Sherwood store, and 8.2% in Bella Vista. Upon learning of these audits and these errors, CVS did go in, conduct additional training, targeted specifically at making sure those errors were fixed. And it did that before it attended the informal hearing. And there was testimony from the patient safety personnel, a gentleman that we all know as Roe, in detail about the steps that were taken by CVS to make sure the issues were fixed, and they were fixed. CVS and its pharmacists are committed to operating safe and highly functioning pharmacies in the communities that these pharmacists live in and serve. You will hear today from 3 witnesses on behalf of CVS. First, to my far right, Council Powell, who is the regional leader for CVS, will testify. Ashley Ellis, to my immediate right, is a district leader who covers almost all of Arkansas, and you'll have the opportunity to hear from her. And then finally, you will hear from Dennis McAllister, who is a longtime pharmacist, a former president of the NAPB, and a member of the Arizona Board of Pharmacy. I expect that you will hear from Dr. Powell and Dr. Ellis that the 3 stores that are before you today are doing well. They are well-staffed and they are high functioning. And I expect that they will also testify that more generally across the Arkansas market, CVS is currently in a very strong position and is doing very well in terms of leadership, staffing, and its general operations. Dr. McAllister will explain, I expect, why there is no basis to conclude that staffing specifically was the cause of these errors that were identified, and that in his professional opinion, there's no basis to conclude that staffing, again, was the cause of such errors. He will also explain that the statutes and regulations that CVS has been charged with violating simply don't apply to this situation. At the conclusion of the hearing, CVS will ask that it be treated fairly and consistently with all other Arkansas pharmacies, and that the charges against it be dismissed for 5 specific reasons. First and foremost, in the charging documents, the board staff has charged CVS store numbers, again, 1019, 10408, and 10430, with violating rules and regulations that on their face govern pharmacists, not pharmacies. They simply don't apply to this situation. Second, the board, as you all well know, does not regulate staffing specifically. There is no statute, rule, or regulation of the Arkansas Board of Pharmacy that requires a pharmacy to be staffed at a specific level. Put simply, there is not an intelligible standard regarding staffing levels at pharmacies, and that's just the state of the law. Third, CVS submits that the standard that the board staff is attempting to use here is fundamentally flawed. And it's flawed because the board staff is tying prescription error rates to the purported adequacy of staffing without a basis to do so, and ignoring all the other reasons in the world that could potentially be a cause of a prescription error. Fourth, and even assuming that using error rate is a proper metric to evaluate adequacy of staffing, the board has not, and the board staff has not implemented that standard consistently. And CVS is being treated disparately as compared to other pharmacies. As Ms. Vales mentioned, at around the same time that these CVS stores were audited, the board staff also audited 2 Walgreens stores and 1 independent, and Anderson's Pharmacy. The other 3 pharmacies had higher rates overall of errors than the CVS stores. And with one of the Walgreens pharmacies, the one on South University in particular, and then Anderson's, the error rates were strikingly higher than any of the error rates found at the CVS stores. Those stores appeared at informal conferences for Walgreens a second time, actually a second informal conference the day before CVS held its informal conference. And the board extended each of those stores an opportunity to conduct a re-audit. As to CVS, on the other hand, the board proposed a disciplinary fine of $78,200 collectively. And that consisted of a $250 fine for each and every error identified during Dr. Fain's audit. The board also proposed a fine of $20,000, $10,000 each for the 2 patient complaints that occurred during that time period. CVS submits that this proposed treatment of it as compared to Walgreens and Anderson, which occurred during the same time period with significantly higher rates, is not fair, that it's disparate, and that CVS is entitled to the same treatment and the same opportunities, particularly an opportunity for a re-audit that Anderson's and Walgreens both received. And finally, CVS submits that as we sit here today, and as the evidence has shown since those audits occurred and since those informal hearings to the present, that there are not current and there have not been patient safety concerns with these stores at CVS. These audits occurred going on now 4 years ago, well over 3.5 years ago for most of them. COVID is, of course, a major reason for the delay here, and we don't take issue or point fingers about that. But see, these 3 stores have been inspected by the board staff on several occasions since then, without any significant issues being identified. And the evidence will show, and you will hear, that these stores are safe, they're well-staffed, and they are doing a good job in the communities they serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mills, do you have any rebuttal opening, or do you just want to gravitate into your witnesses?
No, go ahead and call Dr. Fain if
All
I
right.
could.
Call your first witness, please.
Dr. Cindy Fain.
And would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? Do you swear from the testimony about to give in this hearing is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Mills, before you start, board members, it's not my intent to make you do a marathon here. I typically take breaks every 2 hours to an hour and a half. But if you need to take a break before that, get my attention and we'll take one, okay? All right, please proceed.
Dr. Fain, can you state your name for the record, please?
Cindy Fain,
And you were employed with the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy, is that correct?
that is correct.
Tell me roughly the dates that you were employed here.
February 2018 through August 2023.
And tell me, as part of your duties, did you do regular inspections of pharmacies throughout the state?
Yes.
And how many inspections did you think you might have done over an average of a year?
In any given year, I would, yes, I probably did somewhere between 300 to 400 inspections per year.
And at various times during your tenure here, were you also asked to do audit reports?
Yes.
So tell me your background. You are a pharmacist as well?
I am a pharmacist, graduated from Southwestern Oklahoma State University in 1989. Practiced independent retail pharmacy for several years. Some of this overlaps, so the time is not going to line up, but I practiced independent retail for 15 years. I was an inspector at the Oklahoma State Board of Pharmacy for 20 years, and then an inspector in Arkansas for 5 years.
All right, thank you. And you're currently also working as a pharmacist again, is that correct?
That is correct.
So let's go into back in 2020. And we're going to start with the Bella Vista store. Tell me how it came to be that you inspected and did an audit at the Bella Vista store.
So it was just part of my routine inspections, and I went into the Bella Vista store, as I recall, mid to late afternoon. And
that was on October 27th of 2020, correct?
that is correct. I'm just scrolling to that page.
Yeah. And then what did you observe when you went into the Bella Vista CVS?
So while I was there, there was one pharmacist working with 2 pharmacy technicians, and there were numerous baskets on the counter piled up, I think in excess of 50 baskets. The pharmacist was, answering the phone. She was giving immunizations while I was there. I observed the technicians make 2 transactions selling pseudoephedrine without any pharmacist involvement. It appeared to be very busy and somewhat chaotic.
How long do you remember, if you can? If you can't, that's fine too, but how long do you think you were there at the Bella Vista store?
Probably 2 hours.
And based on what you observed, did you report back to your supervisor, Brenda McCready, make a suggestion for subpoena request on some prescriptions?
So when I saw the state of the pharmacy, I decided to review some prescriptions to see, if I observed any errors, because they appear to be very busy. And I observed numerous errors with a just cursory review of about 100 prescriptions. So then I called my supervisor, Dr. McCready, and asked her to send a subpoena so I could take some records and do a more thorough audit.
Okay. And before we get to the results of the audit, go back over, if you would, the pseudoephedrine transactions. Can you describe for the board what you observed regarding those?
I observed two different patients come up to the counter and ask for a pseudoephedrine product. And the pharmacy technician just conducted the transaction at the cash register. And there was no interaction between the pharmacist and the patient whatsoever.
And so what is the importance of that?
So the Arkansas regulations require that the pharmacist determine that there is a legitimate medical need for pseudoephedrine before it can be sold.
And is that something that the pharmacist can get the pharmacy technician to do?
No,
So it must be done by the pharmacist.
yes,
So during those two transactions, you saw the pharmacist did not interact with those two patients at all then?
that is correct.
And then let me see if I can pull it. Yeah. I'm gonna pull up, exhibit. In the board, tablets. It's exhibit number 5. I'm gonna get it on the screen here in a second.
Oh, you need this one?
Oh, okay. We were knocking each other out. Okay, so on the screen there, and exhibit number 5 on my exhibit list for the board members, tell me what this is a picture of.
This is the picture of the work area for the pharmacist. You can see the pharmacist on the other side of the counter, barely in front of one of the technicians. But then those are two technicians wearing the blue scrubs. And there are numerous baskets that are piled up on both sides of the work counter, waiting for the pharmacist to verify them and for them to be filled.
And how many, did you count how many baskets those were?
As I recall, it was just over 50 baskets.
And were you able to inquire with either technicians or pharmacists how long those baskets had been there?
I did not ask that specific question.
Were they there the entire time that you were there, the 2 hours?
Yes,
And so these baskets represent, I guess, in the process, the technicians have entered them, but they need to be verified by pharmacists. Is that your understanding?
that's my understanding, yes.
And so did those baskets deplete while you were there to get added on, or do you remember?
And it stayed consistently around that number.
Okay. And you took a picture of this. Tell me why you took a picture of this.
It just, it's cluttered, and I could see that there was potential for confusion. And just the fact that there's that much work piled up was concerning to me because it looks like a heavy workload for the staff that was there.
And did you discuss the workload with the pharmacy staff when you were doing your inspection?
I spoke to the pharmacist about the workload, yes.
And what did the pharmacist tell you about the workload?
She said that this was typical and that the only way that the pharmacy would get overlap is if they filled anywhere from 2,500 to 3,500 prescriptions a week.
What do you mean by overlap?
So it means more than one pharmacist working at a time.
So they would not be able to get overlap unless they produced or dispensed more than 2,500 prescriptions in a day. Is that what you're understanding?
Not per day, per week.
Per week, okay, sorry. And with this pharmacist, with this pharmacy, is there a drive-through?
Yes,
Okay. And when you were there for your 2 hours, was it consistently busy?
it was.
Okay. And there was one pharmacist and 2 technicians, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so in your opinion, based on what you observed from the inspection and what you heard from the pharmacist, did you feel like the pharmacy was adequately staffed?
Not in my opinion.
Okay. And based on what you observed, and after your discussion with your supervisor, Dr. McCready, you pulled prescriptions to check and see if errors were being made, correct?
That is correct.
And why did you feel the need to do that?
Because the initial review of prescriptions during the inspection, which I would have looked at about 100 prescriptions, I observed numerous errors. So I wanted to take more records and spend more time reviewing those prescriptions.
Okay, and so tell me just procedurally what you did.
I contacted Dr. McCready and asked her for a subpoena so that I could take records with me. I took those records back to the pharmacy board and I reviewed the face of the prescription and compared it to the back tag, which is the label on the back, to see if the prescriptions were filled accurately. I did not take any electronic prescriptions, and it also will not tell me if those prescriptions were fulfilled properly. It just tells me if the label matches the face of the prescription.
Okay, and you prepared a report regarding what you found, correct?
Yes,
And that's exhibit number 2 under Bella Vista.
yes,
Okay. And according to your report, you pulled prescription folders from September 21st through October 21st, 2020, correct?
yes.
Okay. And so the total number of prescriptions that you reviewed, you have in your report is 1,291. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And those are not electronic prescriptions.
Correct.
So about versus, I guess, hard copy prescriptions and electronic prescriptions, do you have any idea how many the store handles of both? Is it primarily electronic prescriptions or would it be also, it's about 50-50?
I really wouldn't be able to answer that.
Okay. So tell the board what your understanding is of CVS's, how they do the labeling of the back tags.
So CVS's workflow is that they do the data entry in the computer and a back tag prints out and they put that on the back of the actual hard copy prescription before it's verified by the pharmacist.
And for the record, explain what a back tag is.
So the back tag is a label that shows the patient, it shows the prescription number, the patient name, prescriber name, the drug name and strength, quantity, and the directions for use.
Okay. And so should these, the label and the back tag, should they match?
Yes.
Okay. And so let's go over some of these errors, if you would. You found a total error rate of the prescriptions that you pulled of 1,291 prescriptions. 8.2% of those were, in your estimation, incorrect.
Correct.
Okay. And so you're identifying these as errors.
Yes.
Okay. So tell me the type of errors that you found.
So of the 106 prescriptions with errors, 39 of them were incomplete, meaning they left off, if it was a pain medication, they left off PRN pain, or if it was an antibiotic, they left off till all taken, or maximum per day that the patient should take. And
And what's the significance of leaving that information off?
So the patient needs more information. You wouldn't want a patient to get a pain medication and it say one tablet every 4 hours. And then the doctor also said if needed for pain, and all they see is take one tablet every 4 hours, they may think it's to be taken routinely, not only when they need it.
Okay. So you would call that incomplete directions then?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go over another category, wrong refills on labels. How many of those did you see?
So 32, so it didn't, if the doctor put a refill, it was not put into the computer as having a refill. And so patient would have to get a new prescription or think that they needed to get a new prescription because there were no refills on the label.
Okay. So that would cause the patient to call their physician to ask for another prescription when that was not necessary then.
Yes.
Okay. Then you have another category, unclear direction. How many of those did you find? And give me some examples of those.
So I had 17 of those, and sometimes it was the route of administration that was left out, or the SIG code didn't translate. The SIG code is an abbreviation that you type in to get the full directions on the label, and the SIG code might say 1 PO Q6. That's just an example. And then the patient should say 1 tablet by mouth every 6 hours. So sometimes it wouldn't translate properly.
So a SIG code is something that you type into the computer when you're inputting the prescription and it will auto-populate certain things, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so those didn't match up sometimes.
Correct.
Okay. And what is the ramifications for the patient if they get a prescription that doesn't have that based on a SIG code being wrong?
Patients would not necessarily understand what the abbreviation is because it's not common. It's just not understandable. It's just acronyms that the patient would not have any way of interpreting.
Okay, so it would you characterize that as potentially misleading for the patient then?
Yes, easily misunderstood.
Okay. And then you have another category, wrong directions. Tell me you found 12 of those, correct?
Correct.
And tell me examples of those.
So wrong directions. So, like I have a tramadol prescription that was 1 to 2 tablets every 6 hours. And they put 1 to 2 tablets every 4 to 6 hours. Or, hydrocodone with Tylenol 5/325 was 1 to 2 every 6 to 8 hours is PRN is what the doctor wrote. And they put 1 to 2 every 6 hours, which, sometimes leaving off, I'm trying to find some examples.
Well, what would be the ramifications for the patient if that was left off?
So they could, potentially take more than that needed, or they could take less than they needed to control their pain, or whatever the medication is treating.
Okay. And so you found 12 of those. And then you have another category, wrong prescriber. You found 5 of those. So what are you talking about when you talk about wrong prescriber?
So the doctor who wrote the prescription would not be reflected on the back tag or on the patient label, and it would list a different prescriber. And the ramifications of that is, if there was a question, the pharmacist, the patient, if the patient asked for a refill, the pharmacy would send that to the wrong prescriber. If it's a controlled substance, then the prescriber might log into the prescription drug monitoring program and think that the patient is seeing a different prescriber. There's just, multiple.
Okay. And then the next category you have on your report is original prescription back tagged incorrectly. And you had found 3 of those. Tell me what that category entails or why you have that on there report like that.
So that's one where it would have, if it was a prescription for, prescription number one for Joe Jones for hydrocodone, and then it would have a back tag for, John Smith for a different drug. So it didn't match it at all.
And so there's ramifications for that with regard to DEA regulations, correct?
Right. The DEA regulations require that you have, like the DEA number, the date, the quantity that you dispensed, the patient's address. And sometimes if the prescription doesn't hold all that information, that back tag fulfills that, the requirements by the DEA.
Okay. And then, you've got one prescription you found that has the wrong strength.
So it was written for aspirin 325 milligram and dispensed as aspirin enteric coated 81 milligram.
Okay. And then you have one prescription wrong drug altogether. Tell the board what that was.
Percocet 5/325 was prescribed and hydrocodone 5/325 was dispensed.
And obviously that's complete error.
Correct.
And then the next category you have on your reports, incorrect days supplied versus BUD. Just for the record, what is BUD?
Beyond use date.
Okay. And so what is your example on that?
So there was some azithromycin suspension that was dispensed to give one meal every other day for 30 days. And they dispensed 15 meals, which would be sufficient, except for the fact that it's only stable for 10 days, the beyond use date after it's reconstituted. So they needed to dispense less or, contact the doctor for additional medication because they should have given them a 10-day supply on 3 different occasions.
And then you have, next item in your report is the pharmacists involved in misfills were determined by initials on labels. And you have 4 pharmacists that, you have identified as making errors. Is that correct? And so these were not necessarily attributed. You have 46 attributable to pharmacist Katie Lentz, correct?
Yes.
And how many do you have with pharmacist Thakor?
Dr. Thakor, I have 54 for her.
Okay. And then you have a relief pharmacist that had 3 and another relief pharmacist that had 3, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So during that time, there was also a note in your report about immunization pharmacist that was there from 2 to 6 a few days a week. And you were concerned about there's no overlap in pharmacist hours. Do you feel like, based on what you observed in your audit and the fact that these errors were made by multiple pharmacists, that staffing contributed to these errors?
That is my opinion, yes.
And tell the board why you feel that way.
Just the distractions, of having to perform immunizations and there was a stack of, medications waiting to be visual verified. And based on the information they gave me with all their metrics that they needed to do, which would be like adherence calls and immunizations and the time that you had to get them out. The number of prescriptions that they were filling per day it would be hard to do that. And when you're rushed, you're apt to make more errors.
Okay. And so you found in your report, you put some violations on there with regard to Board of Pharmacy regulations for the improper labeling. But we do have a statute on the books that discusses the labeling of drugs, correct?
Yes.
I've got it as in the board's, tablets, but it's Arkansas Code Annotated 2056-211. I'm gonna show it to you. So the first section of that law says a drug or device shall be deemed to be misbranded if its labeling is false or misleading in any particular. Did you find any of the prescriptions that you reviewed in your audit to fit that definition of labeling being false and misleading?
Yes, the majority of them, if not all of them, would be false or misleading.
Okay. And so let me direct your attention to exhibit number 3. Tell the board what that is.
That is a spreadsheet that I put together, listing out the medication errors, the date, the prescription number, prescriber, the drug, what the directions were supposed to be, and what the label directions were actually, and then, like categorized it as a type of error and whose initials were on the prescription.
All right. And let's just go over a few of these. It's an 8-page document, so I'm not going to want to go over every single one. But if you look on this spreadsheet, you give me an example in there of a prescription that had incomplete directions or unclear directions, anything like that.
Very first one on exhibit 3, it's written for clonazepam, 1 by mouth 3 times a day as needed. And the directions were 1 by mouth 3 times a day. And that's for clonazepam.
And so they left off the part as needed.
As needed.
And you earlier testified that that would be an issue for the patient. They would take it when necessarily they weren't in pain. If they did that direction as labeled.
In this case, anxiety or yes.
Or yeah, I'm sorry, anxiety. Okay. Give me an example on your chart of an unclear direction.
Number 21. Well, now let's go to 22. Temazepam. The directions from the prescriber was take 1 capsule by oral route every day at bedtime, once a day for 30 days. And the actual labeled said take 1 capsule by mouth, HSPRN. And I don't think the patient would understand what HS and PRN meant.
I'm having difficulty in finding this spreadsheet. Could somebody help me with that?
If you look
Yeah,
under,
but this is what I'm looking at.
Ms. Rose, can you help?
yeah, Dr. Kraus, if you look under Bella Vista, we're in the wrong. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Davenport. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Okay, so you were on 22 on that first page.
Yes.
Okay, go back over that if you would.
So it's for temazepam, the doctor's directions on the prescription is take 1 capsule by mouth every day at bedtime. And then the label directions take 1 capsule by mouth, HSPRN. And I don't feel like the lay patient would understand what HS and PRN meant.
Okay, and so those are more directions for use, correct? HS and PRN?
Yeah, HS means bedtime, PRN means as needed.
Okay, and so if you look again at the definition of misbranded drugs, would you categorize that as, and I'm looking at 6A, which requires adequate directions for use.
That is, in my opinion, and it's not in it. It is inadequate directions for use on the patient's label.
So in your opinion, then that is a misbranded drug that CVS has dispensed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then again, let's just look at, one that has wrong refills. Give us an example of that.
On the first page, number 16, patient received tramadol 50 milligram. And the prescriber put 4 refills on it, and the prescription itself did not have those refills listed.
And then can you find one in here with wrong prescriber?
On page 4, the bottom 76. The prescriber was James Hanna, or they listed James Hanna, and it should have been Lawrence Schmitz.
Okay, and I believe you testified that could have ramifications for the patient as well, if they had any questions about their prescriptions, correct?
Correct.
All right. Let me just review here. Is there any other prescriptions in your chart that you'd like to highlight for the board? We've covered all the categories, but if there's anything else that you feel like we need to highlight.
I don't see anything that just jumps out at me.
Go to the page 7 of that document, if you would.
Okay.
At the end there, you've got numbers 60. Got some underneath that black box there, 67, 82, 83, 84. What are those indicating?
So let's look at 82 through 85.
Okay.
This was all on one patient, and it was for nifedipine extended release 30 milligram. And there are four different prescriptions that were entered into the computer, and for the same patient, they were all dated the same date. And I was unable to ascertain why they would have entered that in 4 times for the same patient.
Counselor, where is that she's talking about? I'm having a hard time finding it.
At the bottom of the page.
Yeah, underneath the black box of that spreadsheet.
Okay, thank you.
The specific ones and the numbers on the left are 82 through 85 is what she's talking about.
Yes, ma'am. I got it.
All right. So with regard to your spreadsheet here, at the very last column, you've got category. And that's where you've sort of identified incomplete directions, wrong refills, unclear directions. All of those that are incomplete, wrong directions, or unclear, would you identify those as being misbranded?
I would.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to add with regard to Bella Vista store?
No.
Okay. And we have included as part of the packet the actual part or copies of the prescriptions that you reviewed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. These prescriptions that we have, the actual copies are all of those reflected in your spreadsheet?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. Any of those you feel like we need to go over before we move on?
No.
Okay. All right. So now let's move on to the Texarkana store. So board members, that'll be in a different tab in your. Do you recall how it came to be that you inspected and did an audit of the Texarkana CVS pharmacy?
don't think I inspected this pharmacy. I was asked by Dr. McCready to conduct an audit at this pharmacy.
Was it your understanding there was a med error that had been filed or a complaint had been filed on a med error at that pharmacy?
Yes,
Okay. And so Dr. McCready, your supervisor, told you to go and do an accuracy audit for this store, correct?
yes.
And tell me procedurally what you did.
So I took a subpoena and I went down to Texarkana and retrieved prescriptions encompassing from May 10th, 2020 through June the 3rd of 2020. I reviewed a total of 1,304 prescriptions. Again, no electronic prescriptions were included in this audit. And I'm basically just doing a post-fill review, matching the face of the prescription to the back tag on the back of the prescription.
Okay, so unlike Bella Vista, you didn't spend any time necessarily observing the pharmacies and the technicians on the Texarkana CVS, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so you brought these prescriptions back to the office, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the board, the overall, how many errors you found and the rate, I guess.
So of the 1,304 prescriptions I reviewed, 72 errors for an error rate of 5.5%.
Okay. And then you've got, and we've alleged that there was an additional 22 prescription with errors that had not been corrected or back tagged correctly.
So they had been corrected, but they weren't bag tagged because they put the back tag on at the front. If the pharmacist observes an error or correction that they want to make during the visual verify process, they may or may not go back and put a corrected label on the back of the prescription. And so when I went back, I was able to take 22 prescriptions off of the list of errors because they had been corrected when I reviewed them in the computer.
Okay. So tell the board what types of errors, again, that you found at the CVS Texarkana store.
So there was incomplete directions, wrong prescriber, wrong directions, wrong drug strength, and an invalid prescription that was filled.
Okay. So 72 errors total. Let's go over how many of those, and looking at your report, which is exhibit 2, how many of those 72 errors had the wrong prescriber?
24.
And how many of those errors had wrong directions? How many errors had wrong drug strength?
4.
And again, what are the ramifications to the patient when they have the wrong prescriber or wrong directions or wrong drug strength?
For wrong prescriber, again, it's a matter of, questions for the prescriber or the prescriber not getting a refill request because it's going to the wrong doctor's office, or again, the prescriber possibly thinking that the patient is seeing another prescriber besides them without telling them.
Okay. And then you have how many prescriptions you found errors with the drug strength?
4.
And how many prescriptions did you find that had filled invalidly?
2.
And in the Texarkana store, how many pharmacists did you find were attributable to these errors?
4.
Okay. And we have Britta Aid. Can you tell me, she was a pharmacist there. How many did you attribute to her?
24.
And Patrick Z, I'm butchering his name, but how many did you prescribe
37.
him? And Anthony Leggy
10.
and Karina Smith.
3.
And you've got a note in here, it's a 24-hour store, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have any idea how many pharmacists were working at individual timeframes?
So they
shifts?
work 12-hour shifts and there is 1 hour of overlap for pharmacists on Monday.
So that means with the exception of 1 hour a week, there's one pharmacist working.
That's correct.
And you found, some errors that were sort of in certain timeframes as opposed to others. Is that right?
I tried to determine what time of day the errors were happening. And most errors occurred between the hours of 9 and 5, when I would think the pharmacy would be the busiest. And there appeared to be a spike on Fridays.
But generally these, at least between two pharmacists, they're pretty much even numbers. Like Britta 8 has 24, Patrick has 37. There wasn't one pharmacist in your mind that made most of these errors. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so, did you feel, looking at this and knowing the, staffing at the CVS store in Texarkana, did you feel like the staffing or the lack of adequate staff attributed to these errors?
I didn't spend as much time in that pharmacy, so it was hard, but 500 prescriptions a day for one pharmacist and, no more than 3 techs would be a very high volume.
So would you say a reasonable pharmacist would have trouble completing all of those tasks and dispensing 500 prescriptions without errors?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay. So then let's go over Exhibit 3, the spreadsheet. And you've got this sort of categorized the same way. So let's just give me an example of some of these. I guess we'll start with wrong strength. There, give me an example of that one. I think that's at the top there.
Yeah, it's from the very first page, the first one, it was prescribed Norco 5/325 and they dispensed Norco 10/325.
And what's the ramifications for that for the patient?
The patient's getting twice as much of hydrocodone as prescribed.
And then the next one, wrong directions. Tell me about that one.
So that prescription's for Vyvanse and it says 1 capsule every morning and the label just says every morning. So there's no quantity.
So it doesn't tell you how many capsules to take?
Correct.
Okay. And then the next one down for fentanyl. Tell me why that one's an issue.
The fentanyl patch, 50 microgram, it's the directions from the prescribers, apply 1 patch topically every 72 hours. And the label just read apply 1 patch topically, didn't give them a frequency.
So what's the ramification for the patient leaving off that information?
They might apply it too frequently or they could apply it too infrequently.
Okay. Let's go down about halfway in the middle of that page. The tramadol prescription with incomplete directions.
So it says the directions from the prescriber was take 1 tablet every 12 to 24 hours PRN as needed. The label reads take 1 tablet Q12 the 24 hours as needed. So it just didn't translate.
So if I'm the patient, I see take 1 tablet Q12.
The average patient would not know what Q12 meant.
Okay. And let's go down to a couple of others just on that page. The gabapentin. Can you explain the issue with that one?
That one was written by the prescriber as take 1 capsule every 8 hours as needed. And the label read take 1 capsule once daily as needed. So they were getting, a third of the prescribed dosage.
Okay. And you've got the last column is the name of the pharmacist.
Yes.
Okay. And so there's 3, 4 pharmacists and they've all made similar errors by the way that you categorized them, correct?
Yes.
And most of these pharmacists, I think, testified earlier that they work during the day shift.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
And so is there the incomplete directions and the wrong directions? When it's inputted, that's generally done by the pharmacy technician, correct?
And when the workflow is normal, that's my understanding.
And is it the pharmacist's job to make sure that the label is correct?
Yes.
And again, with the same with regard to the Bella Vista store, would you consider these errors with the wrong strength, incomplete directions, wrong directions, would you consider those to meet the legal definition of misbranded drugs?
I would.
And so would you, is fair statement that CVS was dispensing from the Texarkana store misbranded drugs to its patients?
Yes.
All right. Anything else you want to add with regard to the Texarkana store?
Not that I need know of right now.
All right, then let's turn lastly to the Sherwood store. And tell me, this was also an audit for errors, correct?
Yes.
And you were told by your supervisor, Dr. McCready, to do the audit based on a complaint that the board received
Yes.
on a fill error, correct?
Yes.
And so this was not an inspection. You made no physical observations necessarily as you did in the Bella Vista store.
That's correct.
Okay. So tell me again the procedure of how you conducted this audit.
Oh, I retrieved a total of 466 prescriptions from CVS, which encompassed July 17th, 2020 through August 9th, 2020. Of the 466 prescriptions, 26 of them had errors for an overall error rate of 5.5. Again, electronic prescriptions are not included on this, and this is, I'm not able to review what was actually dispensed. I'm just looking at a retroactive paper audit.
Okay. Without electronic prescriptions included.
Correct.
Okay. And again, you're seeing the same types of errors again being made over and over again.
Yes.
So we have incomplete directions, wrong prescriber, wrong strength, wrong number of refills. The same as you've seen at all the other CVS stores that issue today, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's go over again. We've got hard copies of those prescriptions. And then, let's look at Exhibit 3. And tell the board what Exhibit 3 is.
Excuse me. Again, this is a spreadsheet that I created based on the audit that I did. And it lists the types of errors.
Okay, and in this spreadsheet, it's a little bit different than the other two. In that last category, you have a column that says potential for harm. Can you explain to the board what that is or why that column is there?
My recollection is foggy on this, but as I recall, it was a attempt by staff to categorize pharmacy and prescription errors in regard to their potential for harm. So like leaving off PRN or till all taken was the lowest category of potential harm to the patient, whereas like the wrong drug strength or the wrong directions would have a higher potential for harm.
And so was this a tool for you to use as part of your audits?
It was just a tool to try to determine the significance of the errors that were found.
So did you leave off any that scored low, or does this, like the other spreadsheets, reflect all of the errors that you found?
This reflects all the errors that I found, you know, and there were some, if you go on to the second page of Exhibit 3, there's even prescription errors that were listed as 0 potential for harm or number 1.
Okay. So let's just go over some of these in your spreadsheet. Let's just go down to the lorazepam, the second one on the list that says wrong strength. Tell me what the error was in that.
So lorazepam 0.5 milligram was prescribed, and lorazepam 1 milligram was dispensed.
Okay, and that's clearly an error.
Yes.
And what's the ramification for the patient on that?
They're taking twice as much of the medication as the doctor prescribed, and it could be increased drowsiness or impairment.
Then let's go down to the first list, the first page. The coding has wrong directions. You've got dispensed on 7/25/20.
Okay.
Tell me about that one.
So the directions were take 1 to 2 tablets every 6 hours as needed for pain. And the label read, take 1 tab P, as in the letter P, EYE every 6 hours as needed for pain.
What does that mean on the label?
I think the intention was to put PO there, but I don't really have any idea. Plus, it only said 1 tablet every 6 hours, and the prescription called for 1 to 2 tablets every 6 hours.
And so if I'm the patient and I read that label, what should I glean from that?
Well, it's incorrect. It's just not clear as far as like, what does P and I mean? You know, does that mean that they're going to take it by mouth, or are they supposed to do something with their eye? I think it could be confusing to a patient.
And so if you're a pharmacist and you're checking that, would that stick out for you in your mind as being a potential error on that label?
Yes.
Okay. And so that has the wrong directions, which would be misleading to the patient. So would you identify that prescription as a misbranded drug?
Yes.
All right, let's go down to the last 2 on that page that had incomplete refills. Tell the board about those 2 and what your findings were with regard to those prescriptions.
It's just, you know, the doctor prescribed an additional refill on the patient's azithromycin Z-Pack, and the ondansetron, oral disintegrating tablets, 8 milligram. It had 2 refills and they left those off.
Okay. And let's flip to the next page. Let's go down to, I think it's 21. Tell me what that one is.
So the hydrocodone with Tylenol 10, 325, the directions from the prescriber was take 1 tablet up to 4 times a day for severe pain. And the directions on the label said take 1 tablet 4 times a day for severe pain. So they left off the word up to.
And what's the ramification for the patient for that?
Patient would possibly take it routinely when they should only take it when it's needed.
Okay. And so you've got on this spreadsheet, the names of the pharmacists that you've attributed these errors to, correct?
Yes,
And there's more than one.
yes,
But the errors are similar. You're seeing the same things over and over again with each of these three CVS stores, correct?
yes.
And you've got an exhibit 4. Tell the board what those are.
That is just actual copies, redacted copies of the prescriptions that I reviewed.
And those, each and every one of those redacted copies of the prescriptions are reflected in exhibit 3, your spreadsheet, correct?
To the best of my knowledge.
And then I'm gonna also show you exhibit 5. You'll turn to that and I can get it on the screen here in a second if I get my IT wizard in here. But if you would tell the board what exhibit 5 is.
So again, it's just a picture of the countertop in the Sherwood CVS pharmacy. And it has numerous baskets that seem to be in disarray on the countertop.
And when did you took this picture, correct?
Yes.
When did you take this picture?
As far as I know, is on the day that I went to pick up prescriptions.
Okay. And what about this caused you to want to take a picture of this counter?
It's just, to me, it's disorganized. It's, and it just shows how far behind the pharmacist was.
Do you know what, or were you told what's in these baskets?
Those are prescriptions waiting to be filled or visual verified.
Okay. And, so do you remember about what time of day you took this picture?
I don't.
But you've seen these baskets stacked up in other CVS stores, correct?
Yes,
We had one from the Bella Vista store, correct?
that's correct.
And so that's why you took the picture, because what did this represent for you, I guess?
It just represented the disorganization and the fact that they're behind on their prescriptions.
So these prescriptions in these baskets are not ready to be dispensed,
No,
correct?
that's correct.
So with the workflow, are the baskets just going to continue to stack up in your observation of this and other CVS stores?
Depending on the number of prescriptions they're filling a day, but yes, potentially.
And how many prescriptions do you recall that the Texarkana, Sherwood store filled on an average day?
I don't know if that's in my report or not. That's a long time ago.
I don't know if it is or not, but
I don't recall. It's a busy store, but I can't recall.
do you recall if that store had a drive-through?
Yes, I do.
And did you feel, based on your audit, that staffing contributed to the errors and the misbranded drugs being dispensed?
My opinion, yes.
And tell me how you reached that opinion.
If there's more than one pharmacist making the same errors, then it's not an individual problem. It's a store problem. And no pharmacist would intentionally make an error. So but there's lots of distractions. And if you're trying to give immunizations and answer the phone and counsel patients and fill prescriptions, it's just, and to me, it increases the potential for making an error.
So in your experience, and you've inspected many CVS locations, correct?
Correct?
Do CVS pharmacists, when they verify their prescriptions, do they do that? Are they able to do that without any distractions as far as their duties? Are they able to set aside time and just do the visual verifications?
No.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that question to the extent it is asking for testimony or attempting to put in evidence for stores that are not represented here today and are not present here today. Only the 3 CVS stores identified are present. If I understood the question correctly, it was much broader than that.
I can rephrase.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
So let me direct you just to the 3 CVS stores, the Texarkana store, the Bella Vista store, and the Sherwood store. In your observation, in those 3 pharmacies, are pharmacists that are tasked with visual verification able to step aside from the other duties and take time to visually verify those without any distractions?
No.
All right. You've talked about some of the other duties, and this you may not know, but are there other duties that in these 3 stores, the CVS pharmacies have to do beyond just dispensing prescriptions?
Well, they're also administering vaccines. They're, taking prescriptions over the phone from prescribers. They're, like I said, counseling patients, answering questions. Then they have metrics that they have to meet as far as like adherence calls, and they have goals to fill prescriptions within a certain amount of time based on if the patient's a walk-in or patients, just not on the premises. So there's a lot. They have to multitask.
And are you aware in observing these 3 stores, how the CVS pharmacists handle refills? Do they have automatic refills that drop in their system, in their computer system?
If the patient signs up for automatic refills, then yes, they do have prescriptions that automatically drop into their system.
And is there a certain time of day that you're aware of that happens in these 3 stores?
I am not familiar with the timing.
Okay. So when you look at, let me rephrase that. So with regard to the CVS Sherwood store, we have 2 pharmacists that you attributed those errors to, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the med error complaint, you had no involvement with.
Correct.
You were just there to simply do the audit based on Dr. McCrady's request of you, correct?
That's correct.
And even though you've scored these prescriptions, there's nothing, you've scored them as a way for potential harm. There's nothing that you left off in that system. All of the errors are reflected in your report and your spreadsheet, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add with regard to the CVS Sherwood store?
No.
So in summing up your testimony with the CVS Sherwood, Texarkana, and Bella Vista, it's your opinion based on your observations and your audit that staffing was an issue and also contributed to these misbranded drugs and the errors that you identified in your report?
I think that contributed to it, yes.
That's all I have for Dr. Fain.
Mr. Mitchell, before you gravitate into your cross, we're going to go ahead and go off the record, take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back on 20 of to quarter of. We're off the record.
Very good. Thank you.
Right, board, you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
All right, we are back on the record. Mr. Mitchell?
Yes, thank you, Your
Ross?
Honor. Yes. Hi, Dr. Fain. Again, my name's David Mitchell, one of the lawyers representing the 3 CVS stores today. I know you testified to this, but I missed it. When did you leave the Board of Pharmacy?
In August of 23.
And I think you said you are currently working for an independent pharmacy. Is that right?
And I'm currently working in a retail pharmacy,
Okay. And who do you work for now?
Sam's.
Here in Little Rock?
No, in Midwest City, Oklahoma.
While you were employed as an inspector for the board, did you have a specific geographic region that you covered, or did you have the whole state?
In the whole state.
And how many inspectors were there during your time at the board?
Well, we had retirements and things like that, but our full staff is 2 retail inspectors and 1 hospital inspector.
And so the 2 retail inspectors, I guess, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, they don't divide up the state or certain stores. Everybody kind of does everywhere.
That's correct.
And when you joined the Board of Pharmacy as an inspector, did you go through any training on how to conduct inspections of retail pharmacies?
I reviewed the regulations, but I already was trained to do inspections because I had done that for 20 years previously at the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy.
Is there any, I guess, standardized or formalized training program for inspectors with the Arkansas Board?
It's just on the job training, shadowing your colleague.
And then I want to ask you the same question, but with respect to accuracy audits. I think that's maybe what you referred to them as, but when you actually go pull prescriptions and review those as opposed to just doing a physical inspection, did you receive any training on conducting accuracy audits?
Not any formalized training. Years of experience as a pharmacist, qualify me to recognize a prescription is accurate or not.
Did you perform similar types of accuracy audits in Oklahoma?
No,
And when was the first time in Arkansas you performed an accuracy audit?
I can't tell you for sure, but it would have been early 2020.
And when did you start working as an inspector in Arkansas?
February of 2018.
So were accuracy audits a new thing for the board in 2020?
That's fair to say.
Do you have my exhibit binder or CVS's exhibit binder?
I do not.
Okay, I think. Well, don't we have an extra one, Ms. Fales? Is that an extra there?
This one?
We have an extra here, either way.
Okay.
We have a couple copies, so we'll make one work. Should have made sure you had that before we started. My apologies. And do you have also a binder with the board's exhibits?
Yes.
Okay,
We have it on there.
perfect. So I think you just testified that the first accuracy audit you performed was sometime around 2020. I'm not holding you to a specific date, but in that time frame. As time went on, did you change the way you performed accuracy audits?
Don't recall changing the way that we did audits. We tried at the end, to try to quantify them so that we could see the potential for harm. But other than that, our process didn't change.
At some point in time, did you become less rigid in how you conducted your reviews for accuracy audits?
Not to my knowledge.
Will you look at Exhibit 11 in that binder, please? And this, for the board members, should be Exhibit 11 under the CVS exhibits. Exhibit 11 is a series of text messages, and I'll ask you to turn to the last page of the text messages. And Dr. Fain, it's my understanding these are text messages.
It's the number before, so 11, yes, yep.
No problem. Yeah, please interject if I lose anybody. And then I think if you scroll to the very last one. And Dr. Fain, I understand this is a text thread between you, Dr. McCready, Dr. Kirtley, and Luke Daniel, who was the prior board attorney. Is that what it looks like to you?
It appears to be.
Okay, and I'll represent to you, it's my understanding that on the right-hand side, sort of the darker background, that's your text, and I also will represent to you that you flip forward that the date of this text was from April 6, 2021, which it's in the record, but that was the date of the informal hearings for Walgreens and Anderson's. Does that sound correct to you?
I don't see the date, but yes.
Okay, and here you state in the text that you've refined your audit skills on that issue, become less rigid. I agree with her. I know this has been, 3 years ago or so it's been a while, but do you recall what you were referring to here in terms of refining your audit skills and becoming less rigid?
Honestly, I don't.
Dr. Fan, have you seen the hearing notices for today's proceedings?
I've breezed through them, yes.
Okay, they are, if I could direct you to Exhibit 34. Just generally speaking, and I think you testified to this already, but in the notices of hearing, the board has alleged that CVS stores 10-019, 10-408, and 10-430 were not adequately staffed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if you look at Exhibit 34, and it is paragraph A9. Will you let me know when?
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. So A9 states respondent pharmacy was not adequately staffed during the period of this prescription investigation. Is that right?
That's what it says.
And then I will save us from flipping through the next two, but Exhibit 35 and Exhibit 36 are the notices of hearing for the other two stores, 10-408 and 10-430. And Dr. Fain, is the allegation the same for those other two stores that the pharmacy was not adequately staffed during the period of this prescription investigation?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Fain, a minute ago when I asked about your training, you said that you spent some time reviewing, I guess, the Arkansas applicable statutes and regulations when you started. Is that right?
Yes.
Are there any Arkansas statutes that set forth pharmacy staffing requirements?
Not specifically.
Are there any regulations of the Board of Pharmacy that set forth pharmacy staffing requirements?
Not that come to my mind.
Are there any metrics or just guidance that the board has issued that set forth pharmacy staffing expectations, such as if you fill a certain number of prescriptions a day, you need a certain number of pharmacists? Now, Dr. Fain, you were the one that personally went and inspected each of the 3 CVS stores, correct?
I personally went to each pharmacy. I did not necessarily perform an inspection when I went to get these records.
Okay, could you just elaborate on that for me? What does that mean?
So, for example, Bella Vista, I went up there to do a routine inspection and reviewed prescriptions as part of that inspection. The other two pharmacies, Texarkana and Sherwood, that I was directed to go there and I simply went up there to retrieve records. I did not perform an inspection during my retrieval of those records.
So in Sherwood and Texarkana, your visit was solely limited to retrieving the records that you were seeking.
Right.
At some point in time, did you make a determination that each of these three pharmacies was not adequately staffed?
That is my opinion, but yes, that is my opinion.
And when did you reach that opinion for each of these three stores?
At various times. So like, you go in and you see how backed up they are with patients at the register and people in the drive-through and stacks of baskets, that's chaotic. And then when you look to see that the prescriptions are being filled accurately or not, and you see errors, then that leads me to believe that it's not adequately staffed, because a pharmacist would not intentionally make errors.
And did anyone else at the Board of Pharmacy participate in discussions with you about or in furtherance or what led to, I suppose, the conclusion by the board staff that these pharmacies were not adequately staffed?
I don't remember things specifically towards that topic, but of course I went over my findings with the director, the executive, the assistant director, and our attorney.
And so did, I guess the attorney at the time would have been Luke Daniel, is that right?
Yes,
And the director, of course, is Dr. Kirtley.
correct.
And so did they participate in discussions with you about whether or not you thought the stores were adequately staffed?
Yes,
Did they express opinions on that topic?
I don't have any recollection specifically, but they must have, because I don't draft the order of notice of hearing. So A9 would have been, determined by the attorney.
Is it, in your opinion, possible to tell if a pharmacy is staffed just by observing the pharmacy? Excuse me, let me try again on that. If the pharmacy is adequately staffed just by observing the pharmacy?
I think there's a lot to that, because you don't always see what's going on. There are things that are going on observationally that you can see, the number of phone calls are doing, the, immunizations, filling prescriptions, answering the phone, counseling. But then there's also things that you can't see that are going on, like managing the day-to-day operations, making the schedule for the technicians, making, ordering medications, those sort of things. So there's a lot more that meets the eye.
And I guess based on your testimony or my understanding from what you said today, you didn't even do those physical inspections for Sherwood or Texarkana, correct?
That's correct.
Will you turn to Exhibit 37? And I'm just talking about the first page, but what is Exhibit 37, Dr. Fain?
That is a copy of an inspection that was performed on October the 27th of 2020.
And this is the Bella Vista store, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is this the document that you prepare when you go conduct a physical inspection?
Yes.
And on this report, I see that there are, a variety of categories where you check if the pharmacy is compliant, not compliant, or if it's, that category is just not applicable. Is that right?
Yes.
And then on the back, there is a, space for remarks, and then you can flag a pharmacy for reinspection. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so this is, you testified earlier about your visit to Bella Vista and observations there. And I just want to make sure this is the inspection report from that visit in October 2020. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, do you note anywhere on this inspection report that you had concerns about the staffing of the pharmacy?
I do not.
And you do list a few remarks at the bottom here, that the store needs to update its employee roster, that you observed 2 sales of PSE, which I think you testified about without pharmacist consultation. And then there was errors upon review of prescriptions and you obtained a subpoena. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But I know you did not flag this pharmacy for reinspection, did you?
I did not. Generally, we flag for reinspection if there's more than 3 non-compliance issues.
So at this time, at least based on the physical inspection, it didn't rise to the level of needing a reinspection.
Correct.
We also now look at Exhibit 38. And the first page of Exhibit 38. And I know some time has gone by, Dr. Fain, but I guess, excuse me, I was confused when you testified that you did not inspect 1043, the Sherwood store, because my understanding is this is an inspection report from that date you went and pulled prescriptions in August of 2020. Is that right?
I don't know when I went and pulled those records, but it's possible that my recollection was wrong.
And on this inspection report, you don't identify any concerns about staffing, do you?
No.
And do you flag this store for reinspection in your report?
I do not.
If you look at Exhibit 39, first page. And again, I know some time has gone by, but this appears to indicate that you actually did do an inspection in the Texarkana store in June of 2020. Is that correct?
That is true.
And so just looking at this, refresh your recollection about that topic.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and if you look at this and in the remarks, you don't make any comments in this inspection report about staffing, correct?
That is correct.
And you also don't flag this store for reinspection, correct?
That's correct.
Earlier, when you testified, I think if I'm understanding and paraphrasing you correctly, you said that to make your determination about inadequate staffing, part of it was your observations at the store. And then another part of it is once you actually have the opportunity to do an audit of the prescriptions and see if they're correct. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
And is there a certain standard that you apply to determine if an error was caused by inadequate staffing or maybe caused by some other reason?
No.
Is there a certain percent of errors that to you indicate there was a staffing issue?
No.
And would you agree, Dr. Fain, that an error could be caused by many things or a combination of things? Is that right?
Yes.
Things such as inadequate training
Yes.
or lack of experience, someone that's new. Just the quality of the pharmacists and the technicians that are there.
Yes.
When you conduct an accuracy audit, I'll just go with that term to make sure we're kind of talking about the same thing. Is that the right terminology?
It's changed,
Okay,
so just, that's fine.
okay. And in determining an error, it's my understanding that any variation from the prescription to the label or the back tag would be identified as an error. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, I've also seen the term, and I'm not a pharmacist, but I've seen the term med error or medication error, which I understand means an error that is potentially more severe. Is that fair?
Not necessarily.
So what is the difference, if any, then in an error on the one hand and a medication error on the other hand?
I think that they're synonymous.
Okay. So for instance, earlier I think you testified that, perhaps leaving off PRN would be on the lower scale of, potential for harm, but providing the wrong dosage or simply the wrong drug would be on a greater scale of harm. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. And so the latter category there, the wrong drug, wrong dosage, those aren't referred to as med errors or medication errors to your knowledge?
yes, you could call them that, but I don't know that it's exclusive to that.
I see. Okay. Thank you. And I think you testified earlier that the board started conducting accuracy audits in addition to just regular inspections sometime around 2020. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what prompted that? Do you know?
My recollection, and this was a long time ago, that there were complaints of prescription errors that had come in to the board by the patient. And because we were not able to go out and inspect during COVID as frequently as we would like, this was a way to determine if prescriptions were being filled accurately.
And was there a discussion or a decision-making process in terms of, okay, we're now going to go out and start pulling copies of prescriptions and doing accuracy audits?
I wasn't part of that. I mean, if there was, I was just directed to do that after we had received a patient complaint.
And I should have asked you this early on, but am I correct in understanding that it's Dr. McCready that is who would have been your, I don't know if supervisor is the right term, but the person that would have directed you and said, Dr. Fain, will you go do X, Y, Z?
Yes.
So going, forward and after COVID, better not say COVID disappeared, but when COVID, subsided to some extent, and I understand, you're no longer with the board, but at least through the time of your departure from the board, did board investigators continue to do accuracy audits?
For a period of time. I mean, I don't know if there still are not, but
I guess when was the last time, to the best of your recollection, that you performed an accuracy audit?
I can't recollect. You
think it was in 2023?
know, no. I'm guessing early 2022. I think you told me there were 2 inspectors for retail pharmacies. Did the other inspector also do accuracy audits, or was that just tasked with you? No, the other one also did accuracy audits.
When you do an accuracy audit, or when you did accuracy audits, I should say, how would you determine how many days of prescriptions you should pull?
It was based on the availability of those records, and, I wanted and what was realistic to take. So, I mean, I generally would shoot for a 2-week period,
Would that be around 1,000 prescriptions on average?
depending on the volume of the store. Yes,
Certainly more than just a couple hundred.
yes.
And did you, in your normal practice, pull, paper prescriptions and electronic prescriptions?
No, no electronic prescriptions. And unless we had a complaint, a specific complaint on one,
You would only pull paper prescriptions?
yes.
And with electronic prescriptions, isn't it true that much of the information from the prescription will auto-populate for the pharmacist?
Yes,
And so, because it auto-populates, I understand then that would reduce the risk of an error then by the pharmacist when they're filling that prescription. Is that right?
that's the purpose.
And with electronic prescriptions and based on your experience, are the error rates generally lower for electronic prescriptions and paper prescriptions?
I don't have any formal analysis of that, but I would hope so.
And you would certainly think so, right? Because it's less for the pharmacist to do. They're not typing in the prescriber name, for instance. So you would think it would eliminate those types of errors.
Yes,
And what about controlled substances versus non-controlled substances? In conducting your accuracy audits, did you have a protocol or what a methodology in terms of, are you pulling both? Are you pulling one or the other?
I tried to pull a sampling of all of the 3 different types.
And with controlled substances, isn't it true that there are extra steps that the pharmacist is supposed to complete before dispensing a controlled substance?
Yes,
And isn't it also generally true that in dispensing controlled substances, the error rate is generally lower when compared to non-controlled substances?
I don't recall.
And when the board started, or the board staff started doing accuracy audits, late 2020 time period, there were 7 stores that ultimately, sort of around that time, had accuracy audits performed. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
There were 2 Walgreens, 1 Walmart, 1 independent, and then 3 CVS stores. Is that right?
To the best of my knowledge, that sounds right.
And the independent was Anderson's Pharmacy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Will you, and I may already have you there, but turn to exhibit 38 if you're not already there. I think Dr. Fain, I'm sorry, I'll give you a minute.
No,
Oh, you're
I'm
there. Okay, sorry. I thought I jumped the gun on you. I think as you already testified, this is your inspection report for CVS store 10-430, which is Sherwood, and the date on the report is August 24th, 2020.
Yes,
And in your inspection report, you found the store was compliant in all areas except needing to update its employee roster. Is that right?
yes,
Now, you also pulled prescriptions to conduct an accuracy audit of this store, didn't you?
yes.
And why did you decide to pull prescriptions?
I was instructed to do so by Dr. McCready.
You will turn to exhibit 31, please. Does exhibit 31 look familiar to you?
Yes.
And what is this document?
So after I would go out on an inspection round, every couple of weeks, I would summarize those inspections for report to my supervisor.
And here under August 24th, 2020, there's the CVS 10-430, which is the inspection report we were just looking at, correct?
Yes.
And it says here again, they need to update their employee roster. And then here you also provide that you subpoenaed prescriptions for accuracy audit from 7/15/2020 to 7/31/2020. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. And on this list, there are a number of other pharmacies listed that you inspected during this week in August 2020, right?
Yes.
So for instance, the same day you inspected Cornerstone Pharmacy, Rose City, correct?
Correct.
And here you noted that Cornerstone, that back tags on their prescriptions did not have prescriber addresses, need to correct or write in prescriber address on phoned in C3V RXs. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, those would be errors, right? If you were conducting a accuracy audit, if they didn't have a prescriber address on the back tag.
It is an inaccuracy. And I don't know that there were any error. I mean, I don't know if there were any examples. That part of my inspection is I just look at the back tag. And if it doesn't have the address of the doctor, then, you know, if they had a physical prescription from the doctor, it would have the address of the prescriber. But if they happen to take any phone-in prescriptions, then they would have to manually write that on there. So I don't have any recollections of if I actually observed any that were out of compliance, but I did observe that there was no address on the back tag.
And so if you had just gone and pulled all those prescriptions and we're looking at them, you know, a month in advance or a month in arrears, like when you do an accuracy audit, we're just looking, you'd be saying, well, these don't have the address. Is that correct?
Potentially, if they were phone-in.
Did you perform an accuracy audit on Cornerstone?
I did not.
Medicine Man Pharmacy here, same week. It needed to update its employee roster, just like CVS, but then it also needed to remove outdated APIs from inventory, including controlled APIs and expired CDS to biennial inventory. Could you explain to me, the non-pharmacist, what that means?
Sure. So they need to remove their outdated compounding chemicals from inventory. So they still had expired chemicals in their inventory. And then the last statement is separate from that. On their biennial inventory, they did not include their controlled compounding chemicals. APIs is active pharmaceutical ingredients. And their expired controlled substances, they did not include that in their biennial inventory.
Based on observing these issues, these deficiencies, did you pull prescriptions into an accuracy audit for Medicine Man?
No.
Okay, going down to Brinkley on the bottom of the page. Brinkley Family Pharmacy, this was actually a follow-up inspection. Is that right?
Yes.
And so does that mean you've inspected once, they have failed? So on your form, you have checked that it needs a follow-up inspection?
No, not in this case.
Okay, so what happened here? I'm sorry, I spoke over you.
Sorry. Follow-up inspection, meaning that they opened up in February of 2020 and we tried to go back to that store somewhere between 3 to 6 months after it's operational to ensure that it is, you know, like if there's anything going on, we can address it from the get-go and to make sure that they're operating according to what we're expecting. I mean, like that they're not operating, for lack of a better word, a pill mill, or there's some sort of illegal activity. You know, I don't want them to wait a whole year before you know that.
And did you pull prescriptions into an accuracy audit for Brinkley based on the things that needed to be done here?
No.
We turn now, and I'm going to switch binders on you, so I hope we tried to not duplicate exhibits to keep the papers to a minimum as best we could. That may have caused more problem than it was worth, but we're now, I'll ask you to turn to Exhibit 2 under the Sherwood, the 10-430 set of exhibits.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Exhibit 2 under the Sherwood batch of exhibits on the board's exhibits, though, not the CVS batch. I'm sorry, I didn't explain that well. If everybody able to find, okay, thank you. Sorry for the confusion there. Dr. Fain, what is exhibit 2?
It is my summary of report on the accuracy audit.
And this, I guess correlates or relates back to some of the documents we were looking at, where in terms of just identifying the store and where you pulled the prescriptions from and how many prescriptions you pulled. Is that right?
Yes,
And it states here that you pulled 466 prescriptions from July 17th, 2020 to August 9th, 2020. Is that right?
that's what it says. Yes, sir.
And you identified 26 errors for an error rate of 5.5% in conducting your audit, correct?
Yes,
And you also note here that electronic prescriptions were not included, right?
yes,
So that means only paper prescriptions were included. We don't have the benefit of the self-populating information.
that's correct.
In your opinion, does a 5.5% error rate mean that the pharmacy was not adequately staffed?
It could be a contributing factor, but it wouldn't necessarily be the entire.
And on your direct examination, I believe you testified that sometimes you would see a lot of the pharmacists with high numbers of errors, and then that would suggest to you that it wasn't a pharmacist problem, but it was a staffing problem. Is that a fair summary?
Yes,
But if you look at this one, actually, Dr. Charles Johnson had 24 of the errors, and Dr. Demario Rollins only had 3 errors, correct?
correct.
So isn't it fair to conclude here that it really was just one pharmacist that was having trouble?
Based on that time period and what I found, it's definitely more than the other.
And it was just Dr. Johnson's error rate that was troubling, not Dr. Rollins's. Is that right?
I don't remember who did what kind of errors, but they're both troubling. But yes, Charles Johnson would be more troubling.
And you also mentioned earlier a patient complaint that the board had received regarding the Sherwood pharmacy. Is that correct?
Yes,
And that's, I guess, what prompted the accuracy audit to begin with, was that patient complaint.
that's my understanding.
And isn't it true that that patient complaint was from a prescription filled by Dr. Johnson? Is that right?
I don't know. I didn't investigate that. That sounds right, but I did not conduct that investigation.
Sure. And I will represent to you, it's my understanding it was, and I don't think we need to go through it. We do have the informal hearing transcripts in which Dr. Johnson came before the board and addressed that error. Dr. Fain, are you aware that Dr. Johnson failed to report that error as he was required to do internally at CVS?
That's my recollection.
And are you aware that Dr. Johnson was actually terminated by CVS as the result of that?
That's my understanding.
And he was actually terminated by CVS prior to the informal hearing. Isn't that right?
I don't know what the timing was.
And since then, Dr. Johnson has been employed by Walgreens on South University in Little Rock. Is that correct?
My best of my knowledge, yes.
I think you testified earlier that you didn't pull information or don't have information about the number of prescriptions a day on average that this store was filling. Is that right?
On some of them, it's notated on the inspection. I know it wasn't listed on Bella Vista's inspection because Katie Lynn's was a new pharmacist and she didn't have an idea. But if we can want to go back and look at your exhibits of the inspections on the top right, I do have what I was told their daily average was.
Okay, and so, on exhibit 38, it shows a daily average of 300 for Sherwood. That sound about right to you?
That sounds right.
Now, you still have exhibit 2 in front of you?
I do.
On your, the report you typed up for exhibit 2, you don't make any notations here about staffing concerns, do you?
I do not.
And you also don't in exhibit 38, the inspection report?
I do not.
All right, we turn to exhibit 39 in the CVS stores binder.
Okay.
I think, Dr. Fain, in Ms. Miles' opening statement and in your testimony, you stated that the Texarkana store 10019 was inspected and an audit was performed as the result of a patient complaint. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, looking though at this audit inspection report, exhibit 39, the inspection you conducted was on June 22nd, 2020. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right, now if you will flip to the boards binder
Okay.
and exhibit 9 in the boards binder for with the group for the Texarkana store.
I don't think I'm in the right spot.
Oh, exhibit 8, I'm sorry. More confusion. Oh,
I don't think I'm in the right spot. So in the boards binder. Okay, so
Is it 8?
yes,
okay,
no, I'm not sure would. Texarkana 8,
okay, I don't have.
Texarkana 9. We're all over the place. Texarkana 9 in the boards binder.
Okay,
Sorry for the confusion. Are you with me, Dr. Fain?
I think so.
This shows, well, exhibit 9 is a copy of a patient complaint that was submitted to the pharmacy board, correct?
Yes,
And this is about Texarkana, correct?
yes,
And the date of this is August 31st, 2020. Isn't that right?
yes,
And so you actually inspected the store a couple months before the patient complaint was made. Isn't that true?
and that's something I need to look at some dates because the inspection may not have been, and it doesn't look like it should have been. Can you give me a minute?
Sure.
So where would I find my report for Texarkana? Yes. Okay. Well, so yes, I went to the pharmacy to inspect it on June 22nd, 2020, which was before the complaint, but it appears that Dr. McCready, the mistake happened on June the 18th. So the mistake error had already happened. This is just when they got the complaint. So they may have been talking to Dr. McCready verbally. I don't know. I didn't conduct that investigation.
Okay, but based on what we see here, the complaint wasn't submitted until a couple months after your inspection, right?
I know that I was directed to go to Texarkana because of a complaint.
And your visit to Texarkana, I think you testified earlier, was just to pull prescriptions. Is that right?
Well, that's the way I recalled it, but that's not the way it is, because I obviously did do an inspection along with the retrieval of those records.
And so on June 22nd, 2020, when you inspected the store, you didn't make any findings about staffing or have any, express any concerns, at least in your report, about staffing, did you?
No,
And the store wasn't marked as needing reinspection due to deficiencies, was it?
no.
We turn to Exhibit 2 in the board's binder.
Which store?
Same store, still in Texarkana.
Okay,
And as Exhibit 2, the report you prepared after performing the accuracy audit on the Texarkana store.
yes,
And this shows that you pulled prescriptions from May 10th, 2020 through June 3rd, 2020. Is that right?
yes,
The patient complaint, though, is, as you pointed out to me, alleged a misfill on June 18th, 2020, didn't it?
correct.
Why not then pull prescriptions from that day or that time period as opposed to several weeks or really the preceding month?
I tried to make it random, within a reasonable recent amount of time, but we already knew about the error from the June the 18th. So we were looking to see what other time periods would encompass.
And the notice of hearings, which we've looked at here, the board alleges that staffing contributed to the errors, including that June 18th, 2020 error. Is that right?
Rephrase.
In the notice of hearing and the allegations against CVS store 10019, there's an allegation that CVS was not staffed appropriately on June 18th, 2020, and that's what caused the misfill that occurred on June 18th, 2020. Is that right?
It says that it was not accurate, adequately staffed. That's correct.
Isn't it true, Dr. Fain, that reviewing prescriptions from May 10th to June 3rd would not provide any evidence one way or another about whether the pharmacy was adequately staffed on June 18th, would it?
No.
And out of these 1,304 prescriptions, you identified 72 errors for a 5.5% error rate. Is that right?
Correct.
Did that error rate tell you that the store was not adequately staffed?
Not in and of itself, no. That's a high error rate, and an error rate to me indicates that there's not enough staff to fill prescriptions correctly.
I think you testified you didn't stay in the store for a couple hours that day like you did in Bella Vista and watch how the workflow went, did you?
No,
You just pulled the prescriptions and essentially left shortly thereafter.
correct.
And this store, you testified, you noted, and I understand, I think, well, here it is actually on the second page of your report, but it's a 24-hour store, right?
Yes,
And so that means it's open 24 hours a day, I guess, to state the obvious.
yes.
Okay, and here, looking at the pharmacists that had errors, was actually one, Karina Smith, who had, at least relative to the others, I know no error is a good error, but she was much lower than the others, right?
That's correct.
And then Dr. Leggy also wasn't, too far behind with just 10 out of the 1,300.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you know which of these pharmacists were working the overnight shifts?
I do not.
Is it fair to say that generally speaking, the workload for an overnight pharmacist is less than a workload for a daytime pharmacist?
You would think so, but I was also told that there was a 24-hour urgent care adjacent to this pharmacy and that they were actually busy overnight as well. But I didn't quantify them as to what time of day they happened. Exactly.
And I'm going to ask you to play musical binders again with me and go back to the CVS stores binder, this time to exhibit 37. Exhibit 37 is your inspection report for Bella Vista store 10408. Is that right?
Yes,
And that's, as we can see from the top, was from October 27th of 2020, correct?
yes.
And in your inspection report, on the second page, you noted three concerns or three remarks, correct?
That's correct.
And you didn't identify staffing as a concern while you, at least on this report, did you?
No.
And you didn't flag it for reinspection?
No.
We turn now to exhibit 2 in the board's binder, and it's in the, staying with the Bella Vista store.
Okay.
All right, and exhibit 2 is your report from your accuracy audit from the store, is that right?
Yes.
But in exhibit 2, you also, in addition to just providing the results of the accuracy audit, you include your comments from your observations at the store when you conducted the inspection. Is that correct?
Yes.
On exhibit 2, we see that you pulled a total of 1,291 prescriptions from September 21 to October 21, 2020, correct?
Which one are you on?
I think Bella Vista.
Oh,
Your Bella Vista store, right?
Yes, still Bella Vista.
sorry. Your paper. Okay, yes,
And you found a 8.2% error rate of those prescriptions, correct?
yes,
And those did not include electronic prescriptions, only paper. Is that right?
that's correct.
In your opinion, does an 8.2% error rate mean that the pharmacy was not adequately staffed?
And actually, yeah, I believe it can be a contributing factor, yes.
And this report, I'll turn you to the second page of your report. Right below where you're finished listing who was responsible for the errors, but you actually talk a little bit about some staffing turnover this store had experienced, don't you? State that this store has had some technician turnover and it's been difficult to find qualified replacements. They have 4 technicians, but is losing 1 and they need 6. Is that right?
What I was told, yes,
And the 6, that's what they were allocated, if you will, by CVS. Is that right?
that was my understanding.
So at least the gap there, the shortage there wasn't because CVS wasn't allocating the resources. It was difficulty or inability to fill a position. Is that correct?
my understanding.
And the date of this was October 2020, so we're still middle of COVID there, aren't we?
Yes.
Now, in the next paragraph, you state that you did not note the number of prescriptions a day due to the fact that the staff pharmacist was new and unable to answer most of my questions. The staff pharmacist that you're referring to there, that's Dr. Katie Lentz, is that right?
That's correct.
And she was new, wasn't she? She was fresh out of pharmacy school.
Yes.
Now, as I mentioned sort of briefly earlier, but you also conducted inspections and accuracy audits of 2 Walgreens stores and 1 independent Anderson's in fairly close proximity within, I guess, a couple months of when you conducted these CVS accuracy audits. Is that right?
Yes.
Will you turn to Exhibit 45 and the CVS stores binder?
Okay.
On Exhibit 45, this looks like the similar report you told us you prepared earlier that would just summarize the inspections you conducted
Yes.
in a given week, excuse me. And it looks here you inspected the Walgreens number 5730 on January 7th, 2020. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you recall that you pulled prescriptions and conducted an accuracy audit of this Walgreens?
At that time? I don't think so.
Do you think it was at some point in time, do you recall pulling prescriptions and performing an accuracy audit of Walgreens 5730 in Little Rock?
Yes.
Is it your recollection that that was later?
Yes.
You know what prompted you to do that?
I do not recall, but no, I don't recall.
You know if it was a patient complaint, as you testified, prompted the accuracy audits for CVS?
To the best of my recollection, yes, but I don't have a specific.
Now we turn to the next exhibit in the board's, the CVS binder, Exhibit 46.
Okay.
This is an email. Look at the bottom as emails go, but the first one is an email from you to Brenda McCready dated April 3rd, 2020. And then above it, there's a response from Brenda McCready back to you. Do you see that?
I do.
And the heading, or not the heading, the subject of this email is accuracy audit. And then we see 3 store results, or three stores there: Walmart 104460, Walgreens on Oak Street in Conway, Walgreens on South University in Little Rock. Do you see that?
I do.
And looking at the Walgreens on South University in Little Rock, is that Walgreens number 5730?
I believe so.
And for that store, you found an error rate of 18.4%. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in response to this email, Dr. McCready said, "Wow," in all caps with 2 exclamation points. Is that right?
Yes.
And at the Walgreens on Oak Street in Conway, we see the error rate was 6.2%. Is that correct?
Yes.
So 18.4%, that's higher than the 5.5, 5.5, and 8.2% for CVS, correct?
Yes.
And 6.2% is higher than Sherwood and Texarkana's 5.5%. Is that correct?
Yes.
We turn to Exhibit 51, still in our binder. What is Exhibit 51?
It's an investigative report summary.
And is that, it's a report for 5730, the Walgreens in Little Rock?
Yes,
You look, it looks like the third paragraph, but it states that you pulled 645 prescriptions from January 2nd, 2020 to January 14th, 2020. Is that correct?
that's true.
So does that refresh your recollection on when you would have pulled those prescriptions?
Yes,
And you reviewed, out of those 645 prescriptions, there was 117 errors for a 17.7% error rate. Is that correct?
114 errors for a total error rate of 17.7, yes.
You're correct. Yep. I'm sorry, my typo. And you also here broke down the error rates between controlled substances and non-controlled substances, correct?
Yes,
For non-controlled substances, the error rate was 24%. Is that right?
that's what it says, yes.
And for controlled substances, the error rate was 12%. Is that right?
Yes,
And then as you discussed with Ms. Vales on direct examination, there were a number of different types of errors that you identified, from incomplete directions all the way down to wrong strength of drug, wrong quantity, that sort of thing.
correct.
Do you recall Walgreens 5730 appearing before the board at an informal conference in December of 2020?
Yes.
And that was the only store that appeared at that time. Is that right? There weren't other stores involved in that. And just to orient you, it's my understanding that was the first informal with Walgreens, not the second where there were more stores. Does that ring a bell?
That sounds right.
And the result of that informal conference was that the board decided to allow Walgreens time to try to improve and to then do a re-audit of the store. Is that right?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
And no disciplinary action was proposed by the board at that time.
Correct.
We turn to Exhibit 43. Is your report from the accuracy audit for Walgreens 4794 in Conway. Is that correct?
Yes,
And at this one, you pulled prescriptions from October 1st, 2019 through October 10th, 2019, 1,009 total prescriptions. And you found a 6.2% error rate, correct?
yes,
You also here delineated between controls and non-controls. And the non-controlled error rate was again a little bit higher, wasn't it?
yes,
7.4%, and control was 4.8%, correct? And you also note here in your report that 6 of the errors were significant. What did you mean by that?
a higher potential for harm to the patient.
Do those give you more concern than errors that are less significant?
Yes,
We turn to Exhibit 49. Exhibit 49 is your inspection report from the follow-up audit at Walgreens 5730 in Little Rock. Do you see that?
I do.
And just to again orient us where we are in time, is it correct that this was the audit that occurred after the first informal hearing, but before the second informal hearing?
Yes,
And in your first sentence here, it states that the follow-up audit was on controlled prescriptions only that were filled in February of 2021. You see that?
yes,
Now, controlled prescriptions were a had a lower error rate than non-controlled at this particular Walgreens when you did your first audit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why did you exclude non-controlled prescriptions that had the higher error rate when you did the re-audit?
Because they do not, Walgreens does not back tag their non-controlled prescriptions. So there was nothing for me to compare, to. So. And I don't know why I have that information on the first one and not on the second one.
With the first audit, at least you were able to conduct an audit of non-controlled prescriptions, correct?
It appears that way, yes.
But then you did not do so on the second one, just controls.
Correct.
And just for these controls of the 224 prescriptions that you reviewed, you found 21 errors for a 9.4% error rate. Is that right?
Yes.
And this is after Walgreens is given a second opportunity to improve and you went back out?
Yes.
Isn't it true that during the initial audit, Walgreens 5730's error rate for controlled prescriptions only was 12%? Approximately 12%, is that right?
If that's what my report said, then yes.
And so Walgreens then, if you're comparing just controls to controls, they went from 12% to 9.4% for the follow-up audit, is that right?
Yes.
And we don't know what they did for the 24% error rate they had for non-controls, do we?
I don't have the information now.
Do you think that only reviewing the controlled prescriptions artificially decrease the error rate for Walgreens 5730?
I don't know.
Did you conduct a second audit of the Conway Walgreens 4794?
It was all running together, so I can't tell you that.
I understand, and it's been several years. Could I ask you to turn to Exhibit 42?
Yes.
And this is a report from a follow-up audit you conducted at the Conway Walgreens 4794. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this again would have been after the first informal hearing Walgreens had, but before the second one.
Yes.
And here it appears you reviewed, well, you pulled 505 prescriptions, but could only review 320 due to the fact that 185 back tags were not affixed to the actual prescription. Is that right?
That's correct.
And why were back tags not affixed?
So it's my understanding, this was before I was employed at the Arkansas Board of Pharmacy. Walgreens came before the board and obtained permission not to back tag non-controlled prescriptions.
Is it your understanding that CVS and all other pharmacies are required to back tag non-controlled prescriptions?
It's a policy.
And the error rate here the second time around, it did get better. It was 2.1%. Is that right? And that it was, I'll represent to you, it was 6.2% was the error rate the first audit.
Okay.
So even the second time around, though, they didn't completely eliminate errors, did they?
No.
After these two second accuracy audits on 4794 and 5730, the board conducted a second informal conference that occurred on April 6, 2021, correct?
Say that again.
The board conducted a second informal conference with Walgreens on April 6, 2021, after these second audits were conducted.
That sounds right.
And that was just one day before CVS's informal conference, which was April 7th, 2021. Do you remember that?
Yes.
We didn't get to be here. We were all by Zoom, at that time. And the board, I think you testified at that informal conference, and you testified that the error rate for Walgreens 5730 went from the 17.7% down to 9.4% on the second audit. But also noted the second audit was just on controlled substances. Is that what your testimony would have been to the board?
That sounds accurate.
And the board did not propose to take any disciplinary action against Walgreens 5730, did they?
No.
The board calculated the hours that the staff, that you and others had spent, and then proposed a non-disciplinary assessment of investigative costs. Is that correct?
I don't recall the specifics.
Mr. Mitchell, I hate to break your flow.
No problem.
I don't know how much longer you have on your cross. Could you give me an estimate?
I would guess 10 minutes. And I'm at the board's leisure. I'm happy to break.
I'll turn it over to the board. Mr. President, board, I saw lunch trundle in about 30 minutes or so ago. You want Mr. Mitchell to finish his cross and then break for lunch?
Yes,
All
let's
right.
get through his cross and then
All right.
we'll break.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Mitchell.
No problem at all.
Proceed.
Dr. Fain, you also conducted an accuracy audit for Anderson's Pharmacy.
That's correct.
We turned to Exhibit 4 in the CVS stores binder.
Okay.
Is Exhibit 4 your report from your accuracy audit for Anderson's?
Yes, it is.
And we see here that you reviewed 1,000 prescriptions from May 25th, 2020 through June 12th, 2020. Is that right?
Yes.
And you found 113 errors for an 11% error rate, correct?
Yeah.
But also here, you note that electronic prescriptions were reviewed for Anderson's. Is that right?
Yes.
You didn't review electronic prescriptions for the CVS audits you discussed, did you?
No.
You didn't for Walgreens either, did you?
No, they weren't printed out and then included in the folders.
Do you think that including the electronic prescriptions or reviewing electronic prescriptions as opposed to only paper prescriptions decrease the results in comparison to the other audits you looked at?
I don't have those numbers.
There's certainly less errors to be made when prescriptions come in electronically, correct?
Potentially, yes.
Like you identified a number of errors for wrong prescriber. That can't happen when it comes in electronically, can it?
It can, but I mean, it's not likely.
And you recall that Anderson's Pharmacy appeared at an informal conference on April 6, 2021, same day as Walgreens, day before CVS.
Yes.
And do you recall that the board took no disciplinary action against Anderson's Pharmacy?
Correct.
In fact, you were not even asked to go conduct another accuracy audit for Anderson's, were you?
No.
The board just asked that Anderson's self-audit itself and report its findings to the board. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, if you look under Amy Gibbons here, still on Exhibit 4, it states that she had 92 errors, but that 13 of those, you make an extra notation here, had pharmacy tech initials instead of a pharmacist name. 2 were C2 prescriptions, 3 were C3 to C5 prescriptions. Why did you make that notation there?
Because if it doesn't have, if it's missing initials or has incorrect initials. That's attributable to the pharmacy manager, and she's the pharmacy manager.
Were those concerning to you?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's the computer system that's at Anderson's. The person's name that's on the end, on the label is not necessarily the person that visual verified that or did the final verification, because it doesn't differentiate between the tasks. So it could be that the pharmacy technician was logged into the computer, but, you know, a pharmacist still would perform that final accuracy. So it's inaccurate in the fact that it doesn't have the right initials on it, but it's not concerning that I think that there are technicians doing something they're not supposed to be doing.
But you couldn't tell, right?
I couldn't tell. That's correct.
And was it concerning to you that you were not directed by board staff to go do another accuracy audit for Anderson's despite an 11% error rate?
I just take direction.
And you attended virtually the CVS informal conference. It was on April 7th, 2021, didn't you?
Yes.
And at its 3 stores, the board heard that CVS had error rates of 5.5%, 5.5%, and 8.2% respectively. Is that right?
Correct.
So that's significantly lower than the 7.7% error rate at Walgreens 5730. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's lower than even the second chance Walgreens had at 5730 when the rate went down to 9.2%, albeit just for controlled, correct?
Yes.
And that's lower, all 3 stores lower than the 11% error rate for Anderson's, correct?
Yes.
And at the informal conference, CVS presented testimony from who I referred to earlier as Roe, Dr. Sadrigas, but I'm butchering his last name, about all the trainings he had performed in Arkansas specific to these stores, even before the informal hearing. Is that correct?
It was before the informal hearing, but after getting served with the notice of hearing.
Right. So after CVS was notified of the results of your audit, CVS went in and did additional training even before appearing the first time before the board. Is that right?
I think that's my recollection. Yes.
The board did not provide CVS the opportunity to be re-audited and show its improvement like Walgreens did it.
No.
The board instead proposed a disciplinary fine of $250 for every single error that was identified in any of your audits. Is that correct? So that totaled, there were 204 errors you identified, running the gamut from wrong prescriber to others, and the proposed fine was $51,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the board also proposed fining CVS $10,000 each for the patient complaints that occurred, one against Dr. Johnson, who had been terminated by CVS, and then also one from the Texarkana patient complaint for a total of $20,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the board proposed $7,200 of investigative costs for a total of $78,200 of disciplinary sanctions. Is that right?
Yes.
To your knowledge, has the board ever imposed a per error fine following one of your accuracy audits or an accuracy audit that was conducted?
I don't keep up with that.
Do you ever remember that happening in the time you worked for the board?
No.
In all of the accuracy audits you conducted, have you ever seen a 0% error rate?
No.
Despite the best, highest functioning pharmacy you've ever been into or audited, there's still, unfortunately, maybe an error from time to time. Is that right?
That's correct.
Are you aware of the board ever charging a pharmacy for violation of drug labeling and branding laws?
Yes.
When has that occurred?
Generally, it's when pharmacies are compounding and the there's either an error with the compounding label or they are using expired medications.
Have you ever seen a retail pharmacy charged with violation of misbranding or labeling laws because of an error made by a pharmacist when they were reading the label?
I have limited experience, so I can't answer that.
Well, in your time, I'm not asking for what you don't know, but just to your knowledge, have you ever seen that?
Nothing comes to mind.
What about the 20 years in Oklahoma? Have you ever seen anything like that?
You have no idea how many cases I have done over the last 25 years. I cannot keep up with them all.
Now, Walgreens, you identified in your inspection report, they had hundreds of errors out of those, couple thousand prescriptions you pulled, correct?
Yes,
Walgreens wasn't assessed a per error fine for those errors, were they?
no,
How about Anderson's? Out of those 1,000 or 11%, were they imposed a per error fine?
no.
No further questions.
All right, Mr. President, board members, I don't know how much time you want to take for your break.
You guys want to come back at 1?
Right,
Good.
we are off the record.
Yes. Sound good. Was that enough time for you guys to?
That's plenty.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.